All right, so let's do another problem that's a little bit more involved. Now, I shouldn't say that. There's just one extra step at the end. It's not more involved. There's just a final step at the end. So our problem is going to be x plus y plus z equals 2. 2x minus y plus 3z equals negative 7. And x plus y minus z equals 6. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write our augmented matrix. So again, it's going to be 4 and 3, and I'll just draw the lines right there. So these are our constants, 2, negative 7, 6. So we have 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, negative 1, 3, negative 7, 1, 1, negative 1, 6. Okay, so again, we want 1s down the diagonal, and we want 0s everywhere else. And we're going to start in the lower left-hand corner, so we're going to start right there. All right. So, how are we going to get 0 here? Well, if I make that a negative, and I add it to row 1, because negative 1 and 1 is 0, and I keep it in row 3, that will create a 0. All right, so again, before we do the math piece, I want to write down the matrix with the rows that aren't changing. The only row that we're changing is row 3, so row 1 and row 2 stay the same. So 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, negative 1, 3, negative 7. All right, so let's do a little bit of math. So we have to do negative row 3. So negative 1 plus 1. Well, that's 0. So this entry turns to 0, which was the goal, so good. Now I have to make this negative, so that's negative 1 again, plus 1, also 0. So we're going to put 0 here. And then we're going to do negative, negative 1 is a positive 1, add 1, and we get 2. So this row becomes 2. And then we're going to do negative 6 plus 2, which is negative 4. So this entry becomes negative 4. Okay, wonderful. So now, again, we go left to right, but bottom to top. So now I want to take care of the 2. How can we get the 2? Well, if I make this a negative 2, so I do negative 2 times row 1, and I add it to row 2, and I'm going to keep everything in row 2. All right, so again, we start by writing our matrix again with the rows that don't change. So row 2 is the only one that's changing, so row 1 stays the same, and row 3 stays the same. Okay, now let's do some math. Negative 2 times row 1, so negative 2 times 1 plus row 2. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. So this entry is 0. Okay, negative 2 times row 1 plus row 2. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2 plus negative 1 is negative 3. And now we're going to do negative 2 times row 1 again plus row 2. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 3 is 1. And then we're going to do negative 2 times 2 plus negative 7. Negative 4 plus negative 7 is negative 11. And we got 0 there. Wonderful. So now we're just going to keep going. Okay, well, normally this 0 would be our next 0, but we got lucky and it is already 0. So we can move on to get this 0. How are we gonna get this 0? Well, if I do -2 times row 2 and add it to row 3, that would make that a -2. -2 plus 2 is 0. Perfect. Where do I want to keep this? I want to keep this in row 2. If you're confused as to where to keep it, you want to keep it where you're trying to get the 0. So we're trying to get the 0 in this entry. That entry is in row 2. So we're going to do our math and keep it in row 2. Okay. Let's write. So let's think to ourselves, what rows aren't changing? Row 2 is the only one that's changing. So 1 stays the same. 3 stays the same. And now I just got to do some math. So we're going to do -2 times 0 plus 0. Well, that's all 0. So this stays 0. Good. -2 times -3 plus 0. -2 times -3 is 6. 6 plus 0 is 6. So this entry changes to 6. -2 times 1 plus 2. -2 plus 2 is 0. This changes to 0. Good, that's the idea. -2 times -11 plus -4. 22. 22 plus -4 is 18. Great. All right, so left to right, bottom to top. So our next 0 is right there. How are we going to get 0 here? Well, I'm going to take -2 times row 1. I'm going to add that to row 3. Because if I make that a -2, -2 plus 2, that's going to give me 0. Where do we keep it? Well, we want to get our 0 in this first row, so we keep it in row 1. Okay? So, we write our matrix. Row 1 is the only one that's changing, so I keep 0, 6, 0, 18, 0, 0, 2, -4. And now we do our math. So -2 times row 1 plus 0. That's going to be -2. So this entry changes to -2. -2 times row 1 plus row 3. This also changes to -2. -2 times 1 plus 2. That's going to give us the 0 that we want. The 0 that we want. And then -2 times 2 plus -4. -4 plus -4 is -8. So this changes to -8. Great. All right, so we're like super, super close. Just move up a little bit. Okay, so what 0 do we want next? Our last 0 right here. How are we going to get a 0 there? Well, if I multiply this by 3, I get -6. -6 plus 6 is 0. So we're going to do we're going to do 3 times row 1 plus row 2, and we're going to keep it in row 1. Because again, -2 times 3 is -6, -6 and 6 is 0. All right, so just like all the other steps, we're going to start by writing the rows that don't change. So row 2 isn't changing, and row 3 isn't changing. Now we do the math for row 1. So we're going to do 3 times -2 plus 0, -6. Then we're going to do 3 times -2 plus 6. That gives us 0. 3 times 0 plus 0, 0. And then 3 times negative 8 plus 18. 3 times negative 8 is negative 24. Negative 24 plus 18 is negative 6. So negative 6 goes in this entry. All right, so we are super close because we have all of our zeros. We have all of our zeros, but we don't have our ones. So that's why I said that this is an extra step. Because now we want to get these 3 entries to be 1. To do that, we are going to multiply by some fractions. Well, if I take that negative 6 and I multiply it by negative 1 over 6, that's going to give me a 1, because negative 6 times negative 1 over 6 is 1. If I take that 6, if I take row 2 and just multiply it by 1/6, that's going to give me a 1. And if I take row 3 and multiply it by 1/2, that will give me a 1. So our new matrix, negative 6 divided by negative 1 times negative 1 over 6 will give me a 1. 0, 0. Negative 6 times negative 1 over 6 is 1. So that's this row. Here, 6 times 1/6 is 1. 18 times 1/6, or 18 divided by 6, is 3. 2 times 1/2 is 1. Negative 4 times 1/2 is negative 2. Now, after that final step, we are in row reduced form, and we have our final answers. We have x equals to 1, y equals to 3, and z equal to negative 2.